All right, welcome to today's meditation time. I encourage you just to get comfortable. Let the spot that you have chosen just be the spot that you have chosen. And maybe you close your eyes, maybe you soften your gaze. Just take yourself through your rituals of settling. We settle the body. We settle the breath. And eventually the settling of the mind begins to follow. And so whatever that looks like for you, just allow it just to happen as you bring yourself into this present moment and anchor yourself to this practice, almost as if it's holding you in place. As you begin to take a slow, deep breath in and a gentle breath out. And then take a breath in. And exhale, let it go. And as we are approaching the end of this 4th chapter of the Yoga Sutras, just a few more verses to go. This chapter is all about the liberation. What does it mean to have these practices and to begin to catch these glimpses of freedom in our lives? Freedom from the things that really used to bog us down before, and maybe they don't as much anymore. Freedom from that constant disturbance that so many in the world are trying to find. And so this chapter, this pada, as Patanjali calls it, it is almost like these assurances that these practices are leading you toward this liberation. And so the sutra for today is no different. It is number 28. And I wanted to share this one translation that I think really captures it. So just listen to these words as you just begin to think about all the fluctuations and disturbances in your mind that you've been through since you began this practice, the ones that you still struggle a bit with, and the ones that have grown just a little quieter. He says, through this practice, the yogi begins to see these latent impressions or these latent disturbances. And as he sees them, he begins to extinguish them from his life, little by little. And so I think there's a lot of assurance here that first we have to see what these disturbances are. And then there's this idea that it's a process. We don't just sit in meditation and all of a sudden the mind is quiet and it is clear and undisturbed. But first there must be a seeing. And then from the seeing, eventually, Patanjali tells us, the disturbances become less. And we actually have, and I love this verb, the power to extinguish them altogether. And so I want to just kind of take you through just an example of what that feels like in our lives. Help us to see it in realistic, very concrete kinds of ways. And so first, let's just pause, just each in our space, in the quiet, just for these next few breaths, just watch your mind. See if it's still and quiet, see if it's moving, if it's disturbing, if it's fluctuating. See if maybe there's a little bit of both. Just notice here. And what Patanjali is telling us in this particular sutra is these disturbances, these fluctuations, these chattering parts of our mind, they're going to come in. And first we notice. And after we notice, we let them go. And so we see it almost as this drifting in, messing up the quiet and the peace, and then this drifting out. We let it go. And then we sit again, and we breathe again, and the disturbance comes back. And we see it, we notice it, And then again, we let it go. And then we reposition ourselves and we sit and we breathe. We start to catch a glimpse of the stillness, and all of a sudden the disturbance comes back. The fluctuation, the thought. We see it, we notice it. And then we let it go again. And for many of us, we feel like the process gets very repetitive. And why can't the mind just learn that we don't want that disturbance? Patanjali is saying, if you will hold to your practice with almost this level of tenacity, eventually that seeing and noticing, that letting go, you don't even have to do it anymore, because you've seen it and you've let it go often enough that it is as if you have extinguished it altogether. And so I want to give you an example in the real world of what this could look like. And it's not always sitting in meditation. It's as we move through our everyday lives. We intend to be peaceful. We intend to be still and calm. And then something comes in, prickles our spirit, disturbs our peace, and we lose it. But then we pause and we breathe again and we realize I had it and I want it back. And I'm going to let that disturbance go and I'm going to start again. So I want you to picture a kitchen sink. And in my own world, this has been one of the ways that I've been able to truly see this Yoga Sutra take root in my life. And in the kitchen sink, we always have, most of us, the dishes. Sometimes we have a habit where when the dishes come in, they immediately go into the dishwasher. Other people, the dishes come in and they sit for a minute. Maybe they sit for a little while. Maybe they get washed. Maybe they sit even longer. And in our home, I have a practice or a habit that's very important to me, that dishes don't sit very long in the sink. And a few years ago, I actually began to give myself permission to go to bed, even with dishes in the sink. And to some, that sounds really silly, but for me, that was a disturbance. And for me to be able to go to bed, lay my head down and go to sleep knowing that there were dishes in the sink, that was a big step. There was a freeing as I allowed myself to do that. And it sounds so silly and so inconsequential, but it's a disturbance all the same. And when we can practice with these mundane kind of disturbances, we're really flexing this muscle of understanding how to let these things go. So a while back, I determined that if I was going to be able to do this, to go to bed, leaving kitchen sink with dishes in it, I needed to make sure those dishes had been rinsed off. So I began to tell my spouse, when you put something in the sink, I need you to rinse it. That way there'll be less disturbances for me to be able to just let this go and come back to it when there's time. And so here we go into this practice of the dishes come in, they don't get rinsed. I feel the disturbance. My peace gets rumbled up, and I say something. And he commits to try to remember a little harder next time. And here comes the next time. And the dishes come in, and I walk past, and they're not rinsed off. And my peace is disturbed again. And again, this sounds so silly and so inconsequential, but if you feel the peace, you most definitely feel when something comes in to interrupt it. But then I started to notice after a while of that I stopped saying something to him. I still noticed them, but I just went on about my business and I rinsed them off and took care of them. But the things were still happening in my head. I wasn't saying anything out loud, but the disturbance was still there. And then a few more months go by. And all of a sudden I realize the dishes are still coming into the sink, and sometimes they're rinsed and sometimes they're not. But I am now able to walk up to that sink, not give it a second thought, and rinse those dishes, and either leave them there to sit or load them in the dishwasher. That is the liberation that Patanjali is talking about. I have no disturbance. I have no fluctuation. I have no sensations arising when I see those dishes. I noticed, in fact, one day this week already, that when it happened, I actually smiled about it. And I realized that I am continuing to flex this muscle of extinguishing these fluctuations of my peace. And so I'd ask each of us, as you think about that really silly but so concrete example, what would be one disturbance that you'd be willing to practice that with? What's the one thing, or a one thing, that kind of pushes your buttons? It might be connected to someone else and their behavior. It might be connected to something very different than that. But are you willing to practice this idea of, I notice it, I let it go, and I try again. And then I notice it, and I let it go, and I try again. And I notice it, and I let it go, and I try again. Until all of a sudden, I'm not noticing it anymore. And so let's just pause here. Let's just see, each of us in our space, are you willing to sit with one thing, one dirty dish in the sink thing for you, whatever that is? And are you willing to practice this process of extinguishing these things that are interrupting and disturbing our peace? And so let's just pause here. Just think to yourself, what's your dishes in the sink thing that you're willing to take this practice and go apply it there? Because if we only find the calm in our minds during the minutes of meditation, but the other 1,400 minutes are interrupted and turbulent, then all we had was 5 or 10 minutes of calm and a day of turbulence. So just pause and think to yourself, what's my dishes in the sink thing? And am I willing to try? Let's take a slow, deep breath in. Noticing all the sensations in your physical body, in your mental self, in your emotions. Just notice them all. Exhale. Release the breath. And then one more time, breathing in, noticing it all. Every single little sensation. And then exhale. Let it go. And so as we close out our practice, I encourage you, Start flexing that muscle. I didn't all of a sudden start smiling at the dishes in the sink after doing this for a day. It was about 4 years ago that I decided that I could go to bed with dishes in the sink. And since then, I've been working and working and working on not letting these little inconsequential things in the sink disturb and rob me of my peace. But the process has to start somewhere. Are you willing to notice, to let it go, to try again, and continue to repeat the process until eventually you know you've extinguished that one disturbance because you find yourself smiling at it instead? Namaste.